Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the hidden psychological forces that secretly control our daily lives. I mean, have you ever felt like someone was pulling your strings, making you do things you didn't really want to do? Well, you're definitely not alone. In this explainer, we're going to expose the invisible social contracts that govern human interaction. And, more importantly, we're going to give you the exact tools to cut those strings.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to think back to a time when your autonomy felt completely compromised by a seemingly tiny, insignificant favor. Like maybe a coworker bought you a $3 coffee, and suddenly you found yourself agreeing to cover their weekend shift, even though you absolutely hated the idea. Why do we do this? Why does a tiny, completely unprompted gift suddenly make us feel like we owe someone our time, our money, or our energy?
That brings us to Section 1, the invisible social rules, unmasking reciprocity and guilt.
You see, our lives are governed by these incredibly powerful, unwritten social contracts that dictate exactly how we treat one another. And at the very center of these rules is something sociologist Alvin Gouldner defined as the norm of reciprocity. Basically, this is a deeply ingrained social expectation to repay in kind what others have done for us. It's a universal mechanism, and it literally compels us to return favors simply to avoid that profound psychological discomfort of feeling indebted. We are just wired to absolutely hate the feeling of owing someone else.
So just how automatic is this rule? Well, in 1976, sociologists Philip Kunz and Michael Wolcott conducted this fascinating experiment. They mailed out holiday cards to a massive list of complete strangers. And what happened? The response was overwhelming. Cards just came pouring back from people who had absolutely no idea who the senders were. I mean, they didn't even stop to ask who on earth are these people. They just reflexively mailed a card right back. This really proves that the reciprocity rule operates automatically. It often completely overrides logic or even basic curiosity.
Let's move on to Section 2, why we feel indebted, survival, social capital, and conscience.
So why are our brains hardwired to care so deeply about owing someone else? The answer actually lies deep in our evolutionary history. About 200,000 years ago, early humans survived by building networks of obligation. Anthropologists like Leakey and Lewin noted that if you shared food during times of plenty, your neighbors would help you out during times of scarcity. Fast forward to the 20th century, and evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers introduces the concept of reciprocal altruism. This showed that this urge to give and take is actually a key evolutionary survival trait. And today, in our modern era, this has evolved into digital reciprocity. Now it's not food, it's likes, shares, and comments that fuel our online social capital. We are literally exchanging ancient survival tactics for digital engagement.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Because we evolved to care so much about social harmony, our conscience is highly sensitive. Spiritual teacher Jay Chodagam explains that there are actually two types of guilt. The first is true guilt. This is your internal conscience signaling that you're off course. It's healthy, right? It's a natural prompt for self-inquiry. But then there's imposed guilt. This is pure external manipulation. It's when parents, partners, or managers deliberately induce guilt to control your feelings and your behavior. Chodagam notes that the ego can actually hijack our conscience here. It keeps us trapped in a negative self-image where we think we're a bad person simply because we didn't comply with someone else's demands.
Which leads perfectly into Section 3, the puppeteer's playbook, when norms become weapons. What happens when these deeply ingrained evolutionary traits, our need to reciprocate and our vulnerability to guilt, are actually weaponized by people who just want to control us? Clinical psychologist Lena Dickin lists several common manipulation tactics that exploit our social wiring, things like guilt tripping, gaslighting, love bombing, and the silent treatment. These aren't just annoying behaviors, they are forms of emotional abuse. They completely disregard your autonomy. But the tactic we really need to focus on right now is the reciprocity trap. This is when someone does you an uninvited favor specifically to create a debt.
To see this reciprocity trap in action, we have to look at the classic 1971 Regan study. Here, participants thought they were evaluating art with a partner named Joe, who is actually a researcher in disguise. During a break, Joe leaves and comes back with 2 soft drinks. He hands one to the participant, a completely unprompted favor. Later on, Joe asks the participant to buy some raffle tickets, and guess what? The people who received that uninvited soft drink bought significantly more tickets. The feeling of indebtedness was so powerful that it forced them to comply, completely overriding whether they actually even liked Joe personally or not.
Now for Section 4,
Calculated traps, exploiting the mind.
These traps are specific, highly calculated psychological maneuvers used by marketers, salespeople, and even toxic friends to force your compliance. One of the most famous is Robert Cialdini's door-in-the-face technique. It works in 3 distinct steps. Step 1, you make a massive, unreasonable request that you know for a fact will be rejected. Step 2, you accept that rejection gracefully. This creates the illusion that you are compromising. Finally, step 3, you ask for the actual smaller request you wanted all along. Because you supposedly compromised, the other person's brain feels socially obligated to reciprocate your concession. So, they just agree.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer difference in numbers from Cialdini's original experiment. He asked people if they would volunteer as counselors for juvenile delinquents for 2 whole years. Obviously, almost everyone said no. But then he backed down and asked if they would just chaperone the kids on a 1-day zoo trip. 50% of people agreed. Compare that to a control group who were only asked about the zoo trip right off the bat. Only 17% of them said yes. That massive jump from 17% to 50%, that is the pure power of the door-in-the-face technique.
Academics actually debate why this works so incredibly well. Cialdini argued for reciprocal concessions, meaning we just feel obliged to match a compromise. But others point to social responsibility, where the second request just looks like a legitimate chance to help out. And still others point to guilt reduction. Rejecting that first request makes us feel guilty, and agreeing to the second request instantly relieves that guilt. The truth? Well, it's likely a potent psychological cocktail of all 3: compromise, social norms, and guilt.
Another calculated trap is the "that's not all" technique. This is where someone sweetens the deal with a sudden bonus before you've even made a decision. In a famous 1986 study by Berger, researchers found that sales of a 75-cent cupcake skyrocketed from 45% to 73% simply because the sellers suddenly tossed in 2 free cookies. By tossing in that quick, unexpected extra item, it entirely bypasses your logical brain. It anchors your perception of value and immediately triggers that automatic reciprocity. You feel like they did you a massive favor, so boom, you buy the cupcake.
Bringing us to our final part, Section 5, Genuine Connection versus Control, Cutting the Toxic Strings.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the difference between healthy exchange and control. Ethical reciprocity is about offering genuine value, building trust transparently, and respecting boundaries. It's a balanced give and take. Manipulative reciprocity, on the other hand, involves giving unsolicited gifts specifically to create a debt, or using sudden extras to pressure your compliance. The action might look identical on the surface, but the difference lies entirely in the intent.
So how do you build your own personal defense toolkit against this? Start by recognizing imposed guilt for exactly what it is, an external control tactic. Next, treat uninvited favors as potential traps. You didn't ask for it, so you don't owe for it. Also use direct, open communication to explicitly state your needs. Remember that in a professional environment, like the workplace, reciprocity is often highly tactical. It's evaluated by long-term usefulness, not some moral imperative. And finally, be absolutely willing to set boundaries without feeling self-reproach. You do not have to sacrifice your autonomy just to return a manipulative favor.
I really want to leave you with this incredibly powerful thought from Jay Chaudhary. He says, learn and grow and drop the baggage of guilt. True balance and a healthy foundation for any relationship requires us to drop that manufactured, imposed guilt. It only serves the manipulator, not you.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard look at your daily interactions. The next time someone hands you a free sample at the store or does you a favor you never asked for, take a pause. Ask yourself, what invisible string is attached? Awareness is the very first step to cutting the strings and taking back your power. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.